Hi everyone, Sniff Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for another edition of the YUNOREVIEW, where I get into a gauntlet of records that I didn't have the time to do a proper full review of, but hey, I'm going to talk about them in a gauntlet right here, right now. As soon as we go into the transition, let's go, my dog is barking, ba-bam! Oh man, a musical supergroup featuring Damon Albarn writing the same kind of underwhelming songs that he's been dropping on all of his recent solo records, but now with like some schmaltzy organs and a cabaret aesthetic. The prospect does not excite me. As much as I was excited to listen to this new Me Without You record, and as cool as it was to hear the band kind of turn the volume up and get a bit more aggressive once again on a handful of cuts on this thing, once more I am kind of let down again by just how bland some of the softer passages are on this record. I also appreciate the band is changing up things a little bit vocally as well, diverging away from some of the annoying vocal effects and small, nasally singing styles that kind of pervaded a lot of tracks off of that LP. And truth be told, a lot of the personal and cryptically spiritual lyrics on this thing are pretty cool too. All in all, this is not a terrible album, probably the best album Me Without You has put out this decade. However, that doesn't really change the fact that this album still is just not doing that much for me. You know, I just don't have any major complaints about it outside of it just kind of sounding average a great deal of the time. I was pretty excited by this new Bloodbath record at first. I mean, it's easily the band's heaviest album yet. There are some interesting little bells and whistles instrumentally that pop up here and there, some nice keys occasionally on this thing. Also, a lot of the lyrics are surprisingly intelligible, some of which are a little hilarious in a way, dark sense of humor, obviously, with this being a death metal album. But, you know, after repeated listens, I just feel like the songwriting, the riffs, as well as the production, the guitar tone, it's all very meat and potatoes death metal. I mean, it has enough going on to where it doesn't lose its flavor that quickly, but if you're looking for something in terms of death metal that's a little bit more refreshing or cutting edge, this is very much not it. However, if you just kind of want that classic comfortable sound with a little added extra here and there, give it a shot. People have been recommending this record to me like crazy, like you're gonna love it, you're gonna love it, you're gonna love it. I was so psyched to try it and disappointed that it didn't really wow me as much as some people kind of built it up to. And I feel like, sure, there's an interesting and a unique mix of influences and styles on this record. I mean, you do have passages of progressive metal, of tech death, of like some jazz and soft rock influence spots. I mean, very dynamic record in terms of all of the sounds the band can achieve. But outside of all of these styles coming together under one roof, I don't really feel like there's a lot going on with this record that's all that special. I mean, as far as tech death goes, the production and the songwriting on this thing is pretty average, grating, and formulaic. A lot of the softer bits, while they do, again, bring a bit of breathing room and variety to the compositions on this record, they're very bland and milquetoast. Like, I would not go out of my way to listen to the sax passages on this thing in any other context. I mean, you throw these saxophones on a jazz record, they're some of the blandest and most uninteresting saxophones you're ever going to hear. But thrown onto a death metal record, I guess they sound invigorating or just kind of new and exciting. You know, I guess just all of the styles the band's working with in the context of an album like this, it's quirky, it's new, it's fun, but I don't know, in the grander scheme of things, it's not really that exciting. As you guys know, I was pretty excited to try this new Low album. I did enjoy the teaser tracks leading up to the release of this thing. However, once I gave it a deeper listen, it didn't really stick with me. There wasn't really much about the album that was driving me to come back to it and listen to it again and again and again. In fact, as I heard it more and more, it just kind of felt uninteresting and bland. I guess I can give the record one thing, that I appreciate the band trying to experiment more with sound on this record. It's a very texturally dense, ambient-ish record. You know, if you want to hear Low engage in some real sound play, give this thing a shot, because the sounds, the textures, the colors, they're really the best thing about the record. However, what really let me down with the album, though, is that I found a lot of the songwriting to be kind of faint. So without a strong song to carry a lot of these sounds, I feel like many of these tracks don't really build up to much. So I guess in a nutshell, that's essentially this album for me. Really cool sounds, intriguing textures, all that, but the songs, they don't really come with a strong flavor. Yeah, it's like my least favorite kind of post-hardcore mixed with my least favorite kind of metalcore, with symphonic instrumentation thrown into the mix, one-dimensional guttural screams, and lots of and this is not for me. This new Black Eyed Peas record pretty much embodies the power of low expectations, because not only has the band disappeared from the studio album scene for like 8 years, for the decade before that, the aughts, they just release nothing but trash. So you release garbage for like 10 years, then for 8 years you do nothing, and then you come back with like a C- record. A C-, a barely okay album of somewhat conscious, somewhat thoughtful, kind of jazzy rap songs that are cool and laid back, pretty corny lyrics though. C- record, and people are like, whoa man, whoa, have you heard this? It's amazing. Oh my god, oh my god. All the Black Eyed Peas accomplished here is they came out with a record that wasn't complete garbage, which they could have been doing for a long time now, but they just decided not to, because in the year of our Lord 2018, that is when the Black Eyed Peas need to start coming out with political music and jazz rap. Please. This new cult leader, it's okay. If you're into some mathematical metalcore with some experimental bits here and there, I would give it a shot. Nothing all that exciting or groundbreaking or even so impeccably well done that it stands out, in my opinion. There's a little bit of time here spent coming out with some more downtrodden, easygoing, dark, atmospheric music with some clean vocals. Kind of makes for the roughest minutes on the album. But outside of that, it's a decent metalcore record. It's decent. Yeah, this is pretty much another Smino album that's doing nothing for me, but with another record under my belt, I feel like I'm getting closer to why exactly his sound doesn't appeal to me all that much. And I think it's because it's really just kind of a vague blend of neo-soul and hip-hop and R&B, where you can't really tell where one style or sound or even passage of a song starts and ends. It just kind of feels like a hazy mess of very easygoing but somewhat left field vibes that I guess it's got an alternative flavor to it, but not that strong of a direction or an idea or a message. Frankly, I feel like even though there are a lot of interesting sounds and ideas that go into this, they all kind of cancel each other out into a very uniform and bland and mostly uninspired sound. I don't know, guys. I mean, considering how much I enjoyed Young Lean's last project, I'm kind of floored as to how awkward this new mixtape sounds. It just doesn't really come together as smoothly as his last record, which is, again, kind of a shame because I felt like he was departing away from some of the more amateurish and unlistenable elements of his music, but it seems like they're coming back home to roost. New Makaya McCraven record over here. It is a monster at 90 minutes long, tons of tracks on this thing. And while I like the loose improvisational hip-hop jazz fusion feel of the record, a lot of the jams and performances on this thing are pretty milquetoast as far as jazz hip-hop fusion goes, and it's not exactly all that exhilarating to hear the same kind of vibe and sound over and over and over and over. I know that he is a prolific recorder and that I guess he wants to throw out as much material as he possibly can, but I feel like the high points of this record kind of get canceled out by the many tracks whose performances are just okay. Definitely a record that I think you should check out if you're a jazz head, but could have been improved with some mild cutting back. This new record over here is kind of an interesting one for Unknown Mortal Orchestra. While the band has always been pretty clearly influenced by psychedelic pop and neo-psych music, they've never quite embodied that influence in such a way where they're embarking on a bunch of jams. And I mean, this is a pretty short record. The jams have some good textures and experiments going on. I'm not going to say that they're engaging from front to back. Some of them are a little breezy and forgettable, but it's kind of, again, interesting to hear the band kind of play in this style, work their music into this context. For the most part, I think it works, but I don't know if I'm really going to call it as memorable as some of the hookier records they've dropped up until this point. I'm pretty excited for Machine Girl that this seems to be one of his most well-received projects so far. Like, there's a lot of hype behind this one, and I do appreciate some of the genres going into this record, the hip-hop, the digital hardcore, the noise, but I feel like a lot of the drums and a lot of the synths and the sampling as well, this record just seems so deeply inspired by Death Grips. Very deeply inspired. Like Jenny Death, Steroids, a little bit of Money Store here and there, I guess. Some No Love Deep Web. But yeah, it just seems deeply inspired by Death Grips to the point where it's a little distracting. Like you could almost throw Ride on some of these songs and it would pretty much sound like a Death Grips track. I mean, it's cool that he was able to emulate the sound this far, but, you know, I feel like it doesn't really add up to that much in terms of, like, anything new or refreshing. And listen, you guys know that it's rare that I point to an album and I kind of disregard it by way of saying, oh, this just sounds like Death Grips, this just sounds like Death Grips. But really, from a production standpoint, I really do feel like the parallels are so clear that it's, I don't know, just hard to get into. Nicole is out here easily writing some of the darkest and most tortured dream pop out here right now, but unfortunately there were some cuts deep into this album where she's applying some electronic and like some trap elements and some auto-tune on her voice as well, and as much as I guess I appreciate her trying to keep up with the times and everything, everybody is, I'm not exactly sure if these sounds play all that well into her music or even this genre. I mean, I'm sure it will only take time for either her or someone else to bring these sounds into the fold to where I guess they sound less awkward and less tacked on, but unfortunately that's really how all these sounds feel on this new record over here. Some decent tunes, some of her best so far, but really, given the weak incorporation of some sounds that she hasn't really been working with in depth previously, it's a bit of a mixed bag. As much as I tried because of the rave reviews and the small but very vocal part of my audience that's just been begging me to address this record, I have had such a hard time really enjoying this new Soccer Mommy album outside of a few very well-written tracks. And, you know, I will give it to Soccer Mommy that there are a few, like, incredible indie rock songs on here, but for the most part, everything outside of those tracks just sounds like some very everyday, bland 90s rock pastiche that, I don't know, maybe it's because I kind of grew up in the era, but it doesn't sound all that refreshing to me, and it doesn't sound all that well done or memorable either, as far as music in this particular vein goes. And speaking of bands that are kind of stuck in the past, Cloud Nothing's put out yet another album that also feels like just very vague 90s pastiche. And I don't know what it is. Every record since Attack on Memory, it's like Cloud Nothings have less and less and less personality. It's like I honestly could not pin this for a Cloud Nothings record had I not been told it was one. This new Shad record over here is one of the Canadian rapper's most conceptual albums in his discography. It's kind of a war record. There's a bit of an interesting narrative to it, but in my opinion, it kind of fell flat on its face. Also, Shad comes out with a few of my least favorite Shad songs on this thing, one of which sounds exactly like an old Eminem song, like some of the flows that he uses and the instrumental that he picks out. It's a little distracting, and I didn't know exactly why he would do such a thing on an album. Yeah, I mean, look, I do think this guy is a good rapper. I think he's talented. I think he deserves more fans than he actually has, but I can't really say, despite enjoying a few tracks going into this and really looking forward to how the concept of this thing turned out, that it really kind of appealed to me. The new Foxing album, I know it's taken me a while to address it, but I guess I've been sitting on the fence with whether or not I want to review it, because in one breath, it's their best album so far. It's not as washed out, as lifeless, as uninteresting. The songs are more engaging, the vocals are more passionate, but then in the grander scheme of indie rock, it's really only an above average album. So again, I was kind of stuck between feeling those two feelings, like, hey, wow, this is better than all of these records they've made in the past that I didn't like at all. But then, like, would I take a bullet for this album? Would I recommend it to a friend? I mean, not necessarily. Yes, this new soundtrack from our boy Thom Yorke. I guess they were smart to tease toward this thing with tracks that sounded like they could basically be Radiohead demos or whatever. I enjoyed those songs the most, but that's what I was mostly expecting from this thing, but obviously that's not what a bulk of this soundtrack is. A lot of the tracks on this thing are kind of a mix of experimental and drone music, and then a little bit of avant-garde classical too. It's not bad, but simultaneously I feel like this thing is indicative of exactly why I don't really review soundtracks all that often. As I guess kind of a sampler of interesting sounds and moods and vibes, it's pretty cool. But as an overall 90-minute listening experience, no, I have no desire to sit through this thing ever again. So, I mean, it's got some interesting ideas. If you're a hardcore Thom Yorke fan, give it a try. Give it a shot. But, yeah, it just kind of sits with me like a usual soundtrack, making vaguely interesting background music that sets a mood, sets a tone, does. Admittedly, I've never been a really huge Charles Bradley guy, as much as I do enjoy some of the vintage throwback soul artists, specifically ones that are coming out via Daptone Records, obviously Sharon Jones. And this new record over here is also the case, but if you are a huge soul music fan, you love that classic 60s and 70s sound, and for whatever reason Charles Bradley has slipped by you, do give this record a shot, because for a lot of hardcore fans, at least from what I've been seeing, this record seems to be a triumph. There are some interesting song concepts and ideas on this thing, as well as a very interesting cover that I don't want to spoil for you as well. Don't let it slip by you again. If you're a soul fan, if you love that classic sound, give it a shot. Smashing Pumpkins, they're back. Billy Corgan and most of the gang are back. And guess what? They're recording and releasing tepid, over-the-hill, alternative rock. It does not matter that Billy Corgan kind of got the band back together. As long as his songwriting is as bland as it has been on the past couple of records, it's just gonna sound bland, okay? So yeah, it's a bland, stale Smashing Pumpkins album. Listen to Melancholy. I was looking forward to this new Mick Jenkins album, and unfortunately, I just found myself sitting in the middle of the road on it. While it is definitely better than his last commercial album, it's simultaneously nowhere near as good as The Waters. I like some of the conscious lyrics on this thing. I like some of the jazzy beats. But there's nowhere near enough attention paid to the songs, the song structures, and the hooks on this thing, leaving a lot of these tracks feeling very breezy, very casual, like Mick, despite his lyrical efforts, didn't really spend a lot of time crafting these songs so that they would make the largest amount of impact. For the most part, this thing just seems like a smart but very laid back and I guess, impromptu, conscious hip hop record. It's kind of stimulating while it's on, but doesn't really leave a lasting impression, especially with a lot of these tracks sounding pretty samey across the length of the record. And that has been the latest edition of the Why You Know Review. Thank you everyone for watching. Over here next to my head is another Why You Know Review that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Why You Know Review, forever.